this. So essentially, like Jinja, it's a templating language, meaning that it is a tool to write some code for you. So it will write some SQL. It's used to like write SQL and basically have Python write the SQL for you. Why do we use it in DBT? Well, really, like for these types of statements, if you look at this thing, select contact ID as this thing, first name, last name, phone, from HubSpot contacts. Then basically select it all over again, but now from a different type of source, right? From RDS contacts. This is a relatively like simple code base. I mean, we follow all the patterns, but you can imagine there's way more sources. Like you can be connected to Facebook and Google, and if we get contacts from HubSpot, we can also get our contacts from, like we said, Facebook or Instagram or whatever. And we're going to want to select them, right? So we're going to want to perform this statement a lot of times with a union all in between each one. And like to prevent ourselves from having to write this out a bunch, and also from having a lot of verbose code that isn't that informative, right? It just doing the same thing over and over and over again. We can essentially write code that will produce these select statements for us. Okay, like this feels like a loop. Do it once, put your union all there, do it again, but maybe change the source table from there. So for Jinja, you can see what you can do. Because basically, we've already seen some Jinja. Whenever we did this thing, the double percentages, right? And we're like 1 + 1. Let's see if I do that. Select all from. And I can put this here. Actually, let's keep that here, comment it out. And let's compile this. So this is, I forget if it's called a Jinja statement or Jinja expression, but you can see this is outputting, right, the number 2. So when we use the double brackets, I think this is called, let me just check it. I think this is called a statement. Okay, expressions, I got it wrong. Expressions use the double quotes. But the point is, this expression, the double quotes is for you see the result of it afterwards, right? You see the number 2 is outputted to the screen, is outputted or compiled in SQL. This, by contrast, where we're assigning a variable to equal sources of sources to equal this list, you don't see this, right? Like if I compile this, this line is not represented directly in the output here. So when that's the case, that's when you use the squiggly bracket followed by the percentage sign. All right? So you can do other things with the Jinja. For instance, if we want to do let's say for source in sources, let's say select all from. We'll just keep it as 1 + 1 for now, and we want to end our for loop here. So say end for. So it's slightly different syntax in terms of, like, obviously there's no white spacing, so we just have to be explicit about when we're ending our for loop. All right, but again, we're not seeing anything inside of here, right? And because of that, we use the squiggly bracket followed by the percentage. Okay, and then let's compile it. And you can see the result. So now, because there's 2 sources, right? You can see we have 2 select statements. And you can imagine that maybe we want to put a union all in between them. And for each one of our sources, right, we want to stack the results on top of each other. So we put a union all, except for the last select statement, right? If you look at kind of like how we do this over here, you select, then there's a union all, if you select again. But because this is the last one, we don't put a union all, like it's not unioning with anything underneath. So we don't need it there. So the way that we can produce that here is for each source, let's say we're going to select all from, and let's actually do this. Let's say we're going to select all from the source, right? So we're using this dbt function of source, and then the source is going to be this word, source. Is that right? Like that. Yeah, and let's compile it. And I broke it. It might be source. I guess this is undefined. Let's see how I did in integration. Oh, ref. This should be ref. All right. So we're going to select all from ref of this. Okay. So let's go back. Let's close some of these down. Cool. So this should be, and then we'll save it, and then we'll compile it. And like part of what I want to show is just like the debugging of this too. Like I never get this right on the first try. So like I'm always just pressing compile and having techniques to break this down. So one is, just pressing compile. Now this is looking good. Select all from HubSpot contacts. So you can write in, it's taking, because we're using ref, it's expanding that into the database schema table. And then we go to the next source, select all from stage RDS customers. Okay, so that's pretty good. We still have this union all at the end. So what Jinja gives us is we can say if loop dot last, or if not loop dot last union all. This again, I'm doing it wrong. This you don't see, right? You don't really see the content inside of here. So this should be a percentage. And then just like we have to end the union all, end the for statement with an end for, we have to end the if statement with an end if. Okay. So this is saying, hey, always show this union all statement as long as we're not in the last iteration of the loop. So if we had 3 of them here, we can even put in a third one. Something else. All right, and let's compile it. So we can see that we have it for the first one. For the second one, oh man, maybe it didn't find this, so it didn't know what to output. Or maybe I messed something up. Let me see. If not loop.last, looks okay. Show the union all for each source in sources, end the for loop. Let's do compile everything. And maybe I had something highlighted and only compiled the selection. Okay, this worked, right? So you can see we have the union all, but not in this last one. Let's try one more just to emphasize the point. Stage HubSpot companies. There we go. Compile it. All right, so here we have 3 select statements. For each one of them, we show the union all, so long as we're not in the last iteration. So this time we're in the last iteration, so we don't have that union all afterwards. Okay? And then you can basically what you do is you take your SQL and you start translating it into what you originally had. So what we want to do is refactor this code right here so that we basically, instead of having to do this duplicated select statement, we can just use a loop to produce it. All right. So one thing you don't have to do, you don't have to select from these individual, have these 2 statements up here. You can effectively just start at this line. So if we're just trying to produce this, you can do something like with merge contacts as, right? And now this is my CTE. And let's just see, and then you could say for now, I guess, select all from merged contacts. And let's just compile it. You can see we're starting to get to what we had over here. Okay. Let's keep going a little bit more. So we want to select these. We'll start with just these 3 columns. First name, last name, phone. So we do select first name, last name, phone from, and compile. And now you can see, all right, like this should say, we need the word with. Where's that? But we're starting to get there. Okay. And then if you want to, you can, like, at this point, potentially, I'm guessing, preview it. Just make sure, is this valid? Does this work? All right, that looks pretty good, right? Because what it's doing is it's taking this, kind of mix of Jinja and SQL, compiling it, right? Turning it into pure SQL, which we can see right here, and then running this. Okay, so as long as this statement works, it's going to work overall. We can preview it or run it or whatever. Questions about what I've covered so far with this? All right. So the main things are just, Jinja, it's what we call like a templating language, meaning it writes code for us, in this case, SQL. It's also used to write HTML, by the way, the same language. And, we saw variables. We saw loops that you need this end for. And the main thing we saw was basically like the difference between when we are displaying the output, right? We use the double squigglies. When we are not displaying the output, we use the squiggly percentage. Okay? And I think the biggest thing for me is actually like how do you debug this thing? So, using compile is useful. And then if this breaks and you can't figure it out, just break it down, right? Do a single select statement. Does this one work? Run it. Okay, that one works. What about this one? Does this one work? Run it. Oh crap, that one doesn't work. So like one of the things that at least threw me off is, well, now we need to let's try to pull in some of the more complicated information. Like you can see this line is actually different, right? This is contact ID in this line, in this top one, right? Here they're the same, first name, last name, phone, first name, last name, phone. These parts are the same. But if you look at contact ID, in this case, it's contact ID as HubSpot contact ID. And the second time, it's null as HubSpot contact ID. Why? Because we're selecting from our HubSpot contacts over here. So we want the data, or we want to treat this contact ID as coming from HubSpot. In this case, we're selecting from RDS contacts. So we never have data, right, in this statement that's coming from there. So these things actually change. And what you can do in order to like produce, right, one statement that will produce these alternatives is, I'll show you. You can basically, again, we want to produce this output, so we use the double squigglies, and we'll say contact ID as, this is going to be consistent, as HubSpot contact ID. We'll say if HubSpot in source, then we want contact ID. I think it goes like this, actually. Contact ID, if HubSpot is in the source. So if we're on this guy, then we want to select contact ID, right? That's what we saw over here. For the first one, select contact ID as HubSpot contact ID. Select contact ID as HubSpot contact ID. But for the second one, we want to select null, right? So we can say otherwise, else null. And this also has to be in quotes. Okay? So what we're doing again is we're writing code that's going to produce this statement. And for the first iteration, we are kind of writing code that says, okay, because we have the HubSpot source, let's treat the contact ID as HubSpot contact ID. Because, here we have HubSpot is in source, so select contact ID. In the second case, though, when we get to the second iteration, this will be false because we're going to be using RDS. And because of that, we're going to select null, which is exactly what we have here, right? Select null as HubSpot contact ID. So let's compile this, compile everything, and see if it even looks like we get the same thing. Okay. Select, and we got this wrong. Look at this, it's blank. Why is it blank? Because it thinks this is a variable, because we're in Jinja, and this variable is undefined or null. So we need to put this in quotation marks too, and then preview it, or compile it again. So you can see just how easy it is to mess this up. All right, select contact ID as HubSpot contact ID, first name, last name, phone. From this, union all, select null as HubSpot contact ID, right? So now we're basically getting there. Let's see if we can preview this, if this even works. Yeah, all right, good. So you can see we get the HubSpot IDs here, and then here we get the nulls once we move to the RDS stuff, right? Okay, so that's the idea for this. All right, again, we're writing code to produce it. Things that can throw you off is, I'll show you, is basically when these, we're writing code because this is presuming the fact that we can select first name, last name, phone from each one of the tables is presuming that these things, that both stage HubSpot contacts and RDS contacts, customers, here you can see some of the issues, have the same columns. So this is why it's important when you're setting up your staging to try to keep consistent column names, right? It's going to help you later on and make things less confusing if in one table I call it first, in another table I call it first name, right? All of a sudden this becomes a lot harder to write. Okay? So just something to be aware of. Okay, it's basically just Python is what you're writing. You're writing Python to produce SQL statements. So I'll deploy, so that's already deployed. And then we have this dbt end-to-end. So I'll let you all work on that. Questions about any of this? I just say check the compile, run compile often, run your SQL. If you then try to do dbt run and something breaks, right? Just preview a single SQL statement and see does that work. Just always have ways to break it down.